Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a Fazorific Fazbear Friday Fazfest Friday. There we go. Say that 10 times fast. But welcome back, everybody. So as you can see, friend of the channel is back with another FNAF video. But I'm going to do my typical witty banter for a couple minutes. I say that for a couple minutes, but I'm going to turn around and say, oh, I talked for 20 minutes accidentally. Which I will say a couple things. My witty banter stuff is not scripted or planned out or anything like that. Like, I don't read off a teleprompter like that, believe it or not. I say stuff off the dome, off whatever comes to my big Chrome Dome mind, because I don't know, I feel like that just comes off as more genuine than me reading off a script, because I feel like, at least in my opinion, the witty banter stuff is an opportunity for me to share, my own personality, for me to share my, actual thoughts, and for me to actually talk about stuff. Because when it comes to the video part of the stream, we're just simply watching and sharing our thoughts, giving a few sentences back and forth while the video is playing. But this chunk right here is an opportunity for me to share my actual thoughts on whatever bullshit I want to talk about for the first few minutes. So I'm going to talk about that for now. But if you're not a fan of the winter banding stuff and you just want to see the actual content you click on, I do understand that, and I'm going to attempt to learn how to put little chapters in the YouTube videos when I put this on the YouTube archive page. If this is how you're watching this, well, first of all, hi in the future, wherever you're watching. So you can skip the content that you actually want to watch. But the witty banner stuff I want to talk about this week is I see a lot of people talking about the theorist channels, game theory, food theory, film theory, and style theory, and GT Live as well. The theory channels made by the YouTube goat himself, Matthew Patrick MatPat. And the reason why I want to talk about it is within the last month, there's some drama going around that the theory channels, now that MatPat is gone, now that he's retired. Sorry, throat's already getting dry due to allergies. But anyways, now that MatPat has retired and he's no longer the host of the channel's last 2 years, it's no secret that the views are down by a lot. And we're talking about the millions, tens of millions of views they're down ever since MatPat left. But within the last month, they recently announced that they're doing this like subscription Patreon service where they're now paywalling a lot of the videos that would otherwise be free to us, the viewer. It's now being hidden under a paywall. And there's a lot of conversations about it. And this is now my opportunity to share my thoughts on it because I didn't really have a forum to share my thoughts until now. But a couple things about it I want to say. No, I promise I'm going to keep it brief. I'm not going to talk about this for 20 minutes, so at least I'm not going to do it on purpose. But basically, I see a lot of disingenuous stuff out there that, the reason why they're doing this like Patreon, hiding these views behind this paywall is because the channels were bought out by Lunarettes. And it's like, nah, that's true, but you're being very disingenuous to your timeline because the Theorist channels were bought by Lunarettes in 2020 and MatPat retired. I don't know if I put that in quotes. He literally did. Well, it's not that he's old. He literally walked away from the channels and is doing other stuff in 2025. So from that year of 2020 to 2025, the channels were bought up by Lunarettes. So for that 5-year period, the views were better than ever. Nobody was complaining about it. Nobody was saying that the Theorist channels were a sellout. MatPat was a fraud. None of this. From 2020 to 2025. So saying that, MatPat retired and then the channels were bought up by Lunarettes and they did this prescription service like it was one after the other within like a month. That's not what happened. This happened over 5 years. Lunarettes bought them 2020. Nobody was talking about complaining back then, so don't complain about now, is my first thought. And my second thought, um, is this whole idea that um, the views are down for the channels. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. And again, I'm not a stranger to admit, I will acknowledge as well. I don't watch the theory channels anymore, and it sucks because I was a fan of the theory channels maybe since 2015. I think was when I first discovered them. Coincidentally, it was FNAF. That's why I'm talking about it. But yeah, I don't subscribe. I don't watch the theory channels anymore, and it sucks. And I feel like the reason why is because of MadPat. That's why I watched. Like, for instance, there was videos where it was talk about like FNAF. That's a topic I'm interested in, where, I'll click on it and I would watch it. But then there was the, second tier of videos where it's a topic that I've not heard of, I wouldn't otherwise be interested in, but because MadPat was the host, I was like, you know what? Because MadPat's the host, I'm interested in it, so I'm going to click on it and watch it. And then you have the third tier where it's what the videos are now, where it's topics that I'm not interested in. And not only that, but it's not being hosted by MadPat. Like, for instance, if we go down the run of the lines, like, seeing why Penelope von Schweetz from Wreck-It Ralph, why she would not be a, quote, Disney trademarked Disney princess, that 2-part episode, those are videos I would not click on. But because MadPat was voicing those episodes, I watched them. Same goes for like food theory, where something like Coca-Cola inventing Sprite. That's not something I would be interested in. Or bees are technically scientifically identified as fish. Like, those are things I wouldn't be interested in, but because MadPat was hosting, I gave those videos a chance. But the hosts, the new ones, respectfully, they're just not MadPat. And I feel like that's what sucks about it. But anyways, I just wanted to share my little brief thoughts on the theory stuff. But now, let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of this video. FNAF. And apparently, talk about a new game, which I am interested in because, again, I've always had in my head canon that we're going to get a game either the end of this year or early next year, but as we get more and more months past this year, that feels more like hypothetical wishful thinking more than anything actually confirmed, which is disappointing because I want FNAF stuff. I need stuff to talk about.
For the past year or so, most of us have been trying to figure out what the next Five Nights at Freddy's game will be. Since we have no information on it, no teasers or hints, the closest thing we have is a vague chat message that Scott sent to a Dalco livestream, which we will be bringing up. I myself have already thrown my hat into the ring a couple times, but I'm here to do it again, with something I hadn't considered before. Because the next Five Nights at Freddy's game might not be at a Freddy's at all. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So what do we know about the next FNAF game? Not much. We know that the Mimic storyline is approaching a climax, so within the next 2 to 3 games max, we're going to have to figure out what that's going to be and defeat the Mimic, but even that's narrative speculation. Who knows how long they could prolong this story? Putting all speculation aside, what is everything we definitively know about the next Five Nights at Freddy's game? This single chat message. That's it. So either it's a long time coming, or this is genuinely the most dog shit marketing I've ever seen. I want to be clear, it's okay if it's going to take a while. Look, we got a brand new game in Secret of the Mimic last year. The VR port came out a couple weeks ago. It's okay. If they forced a game out every single year, they'd be pretty dog water. That's where fan games and fanverse games and everything else can come in to supplement the times where they're working on these Steel Wool main series games. I just hope that as we get closer to the next Steel Wool Scott game, they actually market it, because they don't do that. Regardless.
Okay, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and I'm going to give my take, my own theory, my own Steel Wool theory. And this is not to sound like I'm a sheep or a Steel Wool shill or anything like that. But I honestly am not as mad or fed up as other people that Steel Wool does not market their games. Because hear me out for a second. Again, I'm not trying to sound like a sheep or a shill. And if you don't get it, Steel Wool's logo is a sheep. That's why I'm saying sheep and shill. But anyways, but I don't want Steel Wool to turn into Star Wars. And what I mean by that is Star Wars announces like 10, 15, 20 projects in a year. And, you know, a couple years go by and you're like, wait, weren't all these products announced? Like, where are they? Are they still happening? Are they canceled? Like, what happened to them? Like, for instance, you know, what happened to the Rian Johnson Star Wars trilogy that was originally set up to be playing, but my guess, because of how bad Star Wars Last Jedi reception was, especially when it comes to audience and fans, they quietly threw out that Star Wars Rian Johnson trilogy. What happened to the Star Wars Game of Thrones trilogy that was talked about for years? Oh, the final season of Game of Thrones was widely hated by everyone. Yeah, let's just cast that aside and pretend we actually did not announce Star Wars to be headlined by the Game of Thrones guys. What happened to the Star Wars movie that was directed by Taika Waititi? What happened to that? What happened to the Star Wars movie that was supposed to be by the woman director? I can't remember her name, but she directed the Wonder Woman movie from like 2016. What happened to that movie? So Star Wars announces like 15, 20 products in a year. A couple of years go by and you're like, wait, are these products even happening anymore? What happened? So I don't want Steel Wool FNAF to turn into that, where they're announcing 15 products in a year and then you're like, wait, is this even happening anymore? So that I will say. The second thing I want to talk about is, again, I'm not trying to sound like a sheep or shill, but my opinion, Steel Wool doesn't market their games anymore because they learned their lessons from Security Breach, for better or for worse. Because again, Security Breach was Steel Wool's first big project, big game they were doing themselves from the ground up. And they marketed it a ton. Obviously, they first announced it, they first teased in 2019. The game was supposed to come out in 2020. Obviously, who could have predicted what was going to happen in 2020? So I'm not going to hold Steel Wool to that, saying, oh, you predicted a game to come out in 2020. Look what happened. Like, I can't blame that. That's being very disingenuous of me to blame Steel Wool for saying, yeah, your game didn't come out in 2020. But it got delayed, it got delayed, it got delayed, it got delayed. 3 or 4 delays later, each delay gets more and more expensive. And people like me as fans, we get riled up because every single time you market something, you're talking about Security Breach, you tease it, it's getting delayed again. And it's like, is this game even coming out? Because every single time you announce or tease something, a month later, you're delaying it another like 6 months to a year. Like, is this game even coming out at all? And then they finally got bullied enough to release it at the end of 2021, I believe. Yeah. December 2021. They finally got bullied enough to release it. And then it was a buggy mess. It was compared to Cyberpunk 2077, which, if you don't know, that's not a good comparison to have for a reason. If you don't know, Cyberpunk 2077, it came out and it was so buggy, so glitchy that the studio was refunding people's money because it came out that unfinished. And people were comparing Security Breach to that. So, if Steel Wool markets something, I don't want it to turn to a Star Wars where they're announcing 15 products in a year, and it's like, is this even happening anymore? And B, I don't want them to turn into a Security Breach where they tease something, they market something, and they get too brash, too overzealous, too confident, and it leads to delays, unfinished projects. If they announce something, I want it to be in a state where it's ready to be released, so that we as a fans get the best possible result. Right? Like, compare Security Breach's marketing versus Secret of the Mimic's marketing. There was way less marketing, way less teasers, trailers, everything. There was just one trailer of Secret of the Mimic, and the game came out, and I feel like it's overly seen as positive and an overall polished and well-rounded good game. Look what happens when... It's crazy. Look what happens when you allow people the time and money and resources to put into a project and you don't rush them. It's crazy. And hey, Dakota, what's up? I don't know if you're still here, but I will acknowledge you.
The main thing we know...
Even though, again, it's always weird for you to come into my FNAF videos because, again, this is not your cup of tea. But, hey.
About the next Five Nights at Freddy's game is if it's continuing the timeline, we can look at the games we currently have and see where we're at in the timeline, so we can try to figure out what to expect moving forward. So what do we know about the timeline, where it is now, and what the implications of that lore is?
Oh, not spawn. Also, I could be wrong about this, but is that like a background pool area from the Backrooms? Because if so, I still have not seen the movie, but I've heard some good things about the movie. And also, speaking of movies and Backrooms, but I'm also going to talk about Obsession because I will say a little fun fact about Obsession. We're entering weekend, the fourth weekend of Obsession. It's still in the theaters. Like, I could go and watch it tonight if I wanted to. If I wanted to end this stream, which is probably going to be like an hour, I can go and watch Obsession in the theaters, which is insane. And also, fun fact, the actual fun fact I was talking about and what I was teasing is Obsession beat out Avengers Endgame at the box office, which is crazy. And if you're like, oh, what are you talking about? Endgame made like $2 billion and it became the most profitable box office movie of all time, beating out Avatar 1 that came in like 2008. And you're right. But the fourth weekend of Avengers Endgame versus the fourth weekend of Obsession, Obsession had more money at the box office. How about that? A little old movie by a little YouTuber outbots Avengers Endgame, the ultimate climax of an MCU Disney saga that was built up over the last 10, 11 years.
Complex, whether or not she survived, and that the Mimic was just freed. As for Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy, they're a bit more speculative as to where they've ended up, because it depends on what security breach ending you think is canon. Now, personally, I think all signs point to the good Vanny ending being the canon ending of Security Breach, and if that's true, then Gregory, Vanessa...
Good Vanny ending, aka Princess Quest. The 1 3-star ending in Security Breach, if you're not keeping up.
And Freddy's head are all available, free, and likely trying to stop Glitchtrap. So with this information, I have in the past suggested the most likely outcome for our next Five Nights at Freddy's game is Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head delving into the ruins underneath the Pizzaplex, eventually ending up at the old sister location bunker, all in the efforts to try to find and rescue Cassie. And I'm still quite fond of this theory, but I had honestly neglected one thing in my analysis for the next FNAF game, and that's the possibility that that next FNAF game isn't a continuation of the modern timeline. After all, there's still a very large question from earlier in the timeline that still does need to be addressed for the Mimic's storyline to progress. And that's how William got his hands on the Mimic. So what is the lore around that part of the timeline? And why are we not sure how William obtains the Mimic? The fate of the Mimic is really up in the air by the end of Secret of the Mimic. And that's mainly down to the fact that there's 3 different endings. It's to a point where it's a whole new secret of the Mimic that we have to deal with. The only ending where it seems pretty definitive where the Mimic ends up is actually the secret ending, the one that I think is least likely to take place. In that ending, Arnold actually does fix the Mimic and it reverts into mimicking David. And once it does that, it just goes to bed. It's really cute. So in the case that this is the canon ending, then the Mimic is offline and is waiting there for William Afton to eventually claim it. Because William Afton did get the rights to the entire property, and if Arnold's job, who was here to claim the Mimic, managed to satiate the Mimic, then all he would have to do is report to dispatch and be like, hey, job well done. Here's your data diver. I'm gonna go sleep for the first time in 38 hours. Right, like that's all he's gotta do. And then William Afton obtains the now docile mimic M1, everything that has to go with MCM. That's what that ending implies. And honestly, the bad ending of the game is fairly similar, or at least is likely to be fairly similar. In the bad ending, Arnold gives the data diver to M1, and then is tracked down and killed by the mimic. But the
I don't believe that ending is a canon ending for FNAF.
credit scene is what belies the fate of the mimic, where it's standing there watching the performance that's being put on. And it seems fully enraptured. Something about this show seems to capture the entire attention of the mimic, which is something that I think M1 is using to her advantage.
Because the reason why I say I have never believed that to be the canon ending is simply because of what we've been taught and programmed to do. I guess a little mimic pun, not intended at all, but what we've been programmed and trained to do ever since FNAF 3, when we've had multiple endings, is FNAF has taught us that simply playing the game normally, just playing the game normally, not doing any secret Easter eggs, going out of bounds, doing anything special, answer quicker stuff, just playing through the game normally, the boring way, isn't a good ending, isn't a canon ending, nobody cares about it, right? Every single FNAF game, you have to do extra stuff in order to get the true ending, the secret ending, the good endings. Like, for instance, in FNAF 3, just playing through the game normally, you get the bad ending. You get the good, true ending, the puppet Happy Stay minigame. By each night, you play an 8-bit minigame and lay an individual animatronic soul to rest until you beat the game, and then you get the Happy Stay minigame once all souls are laid to rest. After you play through FNAF 3. FNAF 4, it's a little bit complicated because we're not really sure what FNAF 4 is. So I'm going to skip past that one. But in this location, you play through the game normally, you get scooped by Ennard and they use you as a skin suit. That could be a canon ending, or is it the canon ending for you to go into the secret room and fight Ennard and then leave the pizzeria? Is that the canon ending? In FNAF 6, if you throw all the animatronics away out into the alleyway, which would be the smart decision, you get the bad ending, you get fired, you get the lazy ending, you get right, the dozer ending, right? You get, and one of those like lazy bad endings, you get the iconic Henry speech by playing through the game and salvaging every single animatronic, bringing them all in one place and then burn it all down. You get the lore keeper ending when you see the grave sites of the Charlotte grave site at the top of the hill with the core four of Freddy, Fozzie, Bonnie, Chica, in the head order of the FNAF 3 heads, where it's like Freddy on the furthest left, who is Gabriel, and then it's Fozzie to the right of Freddy, that will be second, is Fozzie, is Fritz, and then the third one is slightly more in the back, to the left of Fozzie, but on the right of us, that would be Susie, who would be Chica, and then the furthest would be Bonnie, who would be Jeremy. And then you have a little grave site that is hidden in the grass off in the corner, that being Cassidy Golden Freddy. You get that by the lore keeper ending, by completing the mini games and glitching them out by doing the Midnight Motorist, Fruity Maze, and Security Puppet mini games, and then playing the game normally. That's how you get the lore keeper ending. But you get the point. And then Security Breach, obviously, if you just play the game normally and you exit the pizzeria at 6 a.m., you get the bad ending. You have to go through the 3 princess quest arcade machines, beat them all to get the Princess Quest ending. You have to do extra stuff that's not catered to your normal playthrough, just playing through the game normally. So you get the point. So this game, would it make sense for it to be the canon ending if you just upgrade the Data Diver to Executive Access and then leave the Costume Manor? Because every single game since FNAF 3, over a decade, we've been taught that playing through the game the boring normal way is the bad ending. You have to do the extra stuff to get the true ending secret stuff.
We know from the other ending we've yet to talk about that Fiona's main goal, or F10N4's main goal, is to obtain the Mimic schematics, get them to Edwin, and have Edwin repair the Mimic so it can continue being David again. And we know that M1 has some control over this fake pizzeria. So my best guess as to what's going on here is that in this ending, Arnold has given the Data Diver with the Mimic schematics to M1, and M1, who believes Edwin is still alive, which we know from the other two endings, is just satiating the Mimic to wait for Edwin to return. And then eventually, Edwin doesn't return because he's probably dead, but William Afton does. And then we're back to the secret ending again, where there's a satiated Mimic, M1, the Mimic schematics, and William Afton. It's basically the same ending, except Arnold only survives in the secret ending. But here's the problem. I don't think either of these endings are the true ending. I think the ending that's most likely to be true is the Parachute.exe ending. The one where we refuse to give the Data Diver to M1, but we don't have Moon.exe completed and never received the glitched permission. We just obtain the Mimic schematics, activate Cradle.exe, and skedaddle. This is where the fate of the Mimic gets very tricky, because if this is the canon ending, the last time we see the Mimic is tracking down Arnold, crashing his car, taking the Data Diver, and wandering into the forest. That's it. So how would we get from the Mimic walking away into the forest to eventually it being trapped in the FNAF 6 location under the Pizzaplex? It's a question that's so difficult to ask. For a while, I assumed the bad ending was the most likely option, because at least in that one, we know the Mimic is in the FNAF 6 location, and then the next time we see it, it's still in the FNAF 6 location. So at least that lined up. But admittedly, that theory doesn't account for one very specific thing: the changes to the Mimic. One of the things we know about the Mimic is it's able to use robotics to repair itself, which explains why it looks so different in Secret of the Mimic and Ruin. In Secret of the Mimic, we see it in its probably original form, but by the time of Ruin, it's gotten through so much damage and disrepair that it's had to take on so many different pieces of robotics that it looks like this hodgepodge of different animatronics. And something my initial theory did not cover is if it went from this to this, why?
I could be wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, one of the books that states about the Mimic is it's able to repair its body parts, like be some expert mechanic engineer, surgeon, where it's able to repair itself. If I'm not mistaken, one of the books does call it out. And not only that, but take this as you will, but also in one of the radio cassette tapes we see, or I should say here, in this game, is when M2 the Mimic is taunting Edwin after we assume to be an explosion or something where Edwin is calling for help because his legs are broken, and M2 is speaking in Edwin's mannerisms and taunting him, saying like, "Oh, I'm busy, I'm not going to help you, and my legs feel great." Make it seem like their legs are repaired and restored. Meanwhile, Edwin's legs are broken, so he's taunting him. So take that as you will.
Why would it have taken so much damage to have to basically repair its entire body if it never left the FNAF 6 pizzeria? Unless it got away in Secret of the Mimic and had to be hunted down and captured by any means necessary. And that process, the capturing of the Mimic, could be the perfect place to put our theoretical sequel in the timeline. So, what would that be? Secret of the Mimic 2? I mean, it's a 2, not a 3. Nah, I don't think so. Surprisingly, it might still be Sister Location 2. Hear me out. The premise for this theory, as are a lot of theories as of late, was actually submitted on the podcast I host on this very channel, Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. It was sent by Lucy, she, her, who sent in the idea that the next FNAF game might be about Chica's party world. And if so, it wouldn't be Sister Location 2, it would just also be...
Okay, hold on. One second. Okay. I don't know where this theory is going to go, but hearing this, my mind immediately goes to the thoughts and rumors and speculations when Sister Location first came out. Because when Sister Location first came out, we saw that first trailer, we were obviously shocked to see how futuristic the animatronics looked, and it looked amazing, which is bizarre because they may look very futuristic, but it's also very, very early on the timeline, which is kind of bizarre and not what you would expect in a series. But hey, when has a series ever been simple and easy to understand? But that was the first game in the series where the core four, Freddy, Fozzie, Bonnie, Chica, one of the core four was not there. Right, we had Funtime Freddy, who is voiced by Kellen Goff, the absolute GOAT. We had the Bon Bon hand puppet who was on Funtime Freddy, so Bonnie counts. And you had Funtime Fozzie. But Chica wasn't there. You had instead Ballora, Baby, and Ennard instead. But there was no Chica. But then we get to FNAF 6, and one of the characters you're able to unlock is Funtime Chica. So there was a Funtime Chica to exist in this series, but for some reason, Sister Location, she was not part of the roster yet. And not only that, but in the source code leading up to Sister Location, there was a Chica's party world that was seen as an off-brand or separate location owned by Fazbear Entertainment at the same time as Circus Baby's Pizza World. They were open at the same time.
Be a second sister location, literally. In that message, she brought up the fact that Chica has had a weird spotlight as of late. Not only is the original Chica the only character to physically show up as an antagonist in Secret of the Mimic, but we just got all that weirdness about Chica's secret party, and it could even go as far as to explain why Withered Chica of all the animatronics said, "I was the first, I have seen everything." Maybe it wasn't a reference to the MCI, but rather her link to the Mimic's backstory.
Oh. Okay. So, let's think about that for a second. So, that is something that has always frustrated me about that line by Withered Chica saying, "I'm the first, I'm the one who's seen everything." That has always frustrated me for years, ever since I heard that line, because it completely negates everything you expect when it comes to this series and the Death Order, right? Because you have Charlotte, who goes on to possess the puppet. Like, you have evidence where they're the first, because you have lines from Henry in FNAF 6 talking about a wound first inflicted on me that I let spread to others. Well, the wound first inflicted on me would be his child, Charlotte, dying at the hands of his business partner, William Afton, and then the I let spread to others, meaning the other kids, like the missing children's incident, and then other victims beyond that. So that makes sense. But then you have the I'm the first, I'm the one who's seen everything. You're like, wait, is Charlotte not first? Right? Because then you also question if Charlotte's first, but then it's like, well, then how does that make any sense then? Because if Charlotte's first, if that's the first death, then what makes William Afton kill them to begin with? Like, you had to have a motive to kill them. They didn't just do it outright. Like, there had to have been something that happened to lead up to that event. And one of the theories out there of why William Afton killed Charlotte was a revenge plot, because potentially either Elizabeth Afton, who goes on to be linked to Circus Baby, or the FNAF 4 Crying Child, who's linked to Golden Freddy because they're shoved in the mouth of Fredbear in Night 5 of FNAF 4 and then bitten and killed. Those suits, if you remember, they are Springlock suits. And up until Chica the Mimic has changed everything, but up until that point, we've always believed that Henry was the one who invented the Springlock mechanism suits. So William Afton saw Henry's creation, the Springlock suits, one of those animatronics kill one of William Afton's children. So in response and retaliation, William Afton kills one of Henry's children to show him how it feels. That would give him a motive, but that also ruins the thing of Charlotte being first. Right? Because then, how do you explain a wound first inflicted on me that would spread to others? That's not true then. Right? So, who is first then? But if it's not the death order, that helps a lot. It's a complete different interpretation. What we've all thought, it's not the death order. So I don't know if that's much better. If you could have made that more clear what your intentions are. So that's a little bit frustrating. But okay. I will say, if that is what we're going to go with, that it's not death order, hey, I'm on board, because nothing gets me more riled up, as you can tell. Nothing gets me more riled up and triggered than talking about the death order in this series, because it makes no sense that there's Charlotte, there's Susie Chica, there's the FNAF 4 Crying Child, all have a case to be the first kid victim in this series. They all have a case. And the problem is there's all this evidence that points to them being the first victim, but then you also have to actively ignore all this other evidence that says, no, they're first because of this reason.
And William Afton learning about possession. But if that's true, what the hell could this game be about? How does Chica's Party World have any significance here? How would that help us capture the Mimic? Well, I think I know exactly how. And it's all about how the Mimic was caught in the books. It's been a long time since I've talked about the epilogues from Tales from the Pizzaplex, because frankly, they're not really relevant. Realistically, it's just a story about 6 teenagers who sneak into the underground pizzeria and are one by one killed off by the Mimic. It was a great way to introduce the Mimic to the fandom, and at the time it was the only way to really know what the Mimic was capable of, but now we have Ruin and Secret of the Mimic, so we don't really need those to introduce people to that idea anymore.
Even though I will preface saying that Ruin, we don't know anything about the Mimic, Secret of the Mimic is really the only game where we have some solid understanding of what the Mimic is. And I say solid in huge air quotes because we still don't even know what the secret is. But Ruin, he literally shows up for less than 5 minutes. So it's not that much of an explanation. I'm going to call a spade a spade.
Not to mention the fact that in a post-Secret of the Mimic world, we can pretty definitively say that Tales from the Pizzaplex is not in the game's timeline. So, suck an egg, the people who made me doubt that. But what might be of importance now is how the Mimic is defeated in those epilogues. I've always said the FNAF books are most useful when we see things that happen in the books that we can line up to make the same sense in the games. Like how Remnant works in the books, likely works the same in the games. So, how was the Mimic
I've largely had a similar interpretation as well. And it's kind of crazy. I'm going to look this up actually since we're talking about it, because I have not talked about this in a long time. So I'm going to see when's the last time we talked about this. Talking about whether the FNAF books are canon or not. Because if I'm not mistaken, that was one of the first... Yeah. Holy shit. Hold on. I'm going to look this. I'm going to show you guys something. This is insane. So, if you look... Hold on. This is probably going to look very awkward. So, apologies. But as you can see, I'm doing all this live. And yes, I do have YouTube Premium. Oh my god. Look at young babyface me. Has anything changed in this time? I don't know. But the reason I'm showing this is, are the FNAF books canon? 2 years ago, June 2nd, 2024. So ironically, pretty much 2 years to the day. The reason why I bring this up is this was the first ever style of video we've done like this, where I watch a FNAF theory video and I give my thoughts and reactions to it. So we've been doing this for 2 years. That's crazy. And ironically, it was this topic. But my God, I am hit with nostalgia. Look at old me from 2 years ago. Some things never change, don't they? But anyways, as I was saying, my viewpoint of how I viewed whether the FNAF books are canon or not is, I went with this mindset: is book canon, book universe, game canon, game universe. They're separate. But like a Venn diagram, like you learned in elementary school and middle school, where you're doing like essays, you have two large ovals, large circles, but then you have one smaller circle in the middle that shares like common similarities. And that is the lore. At least that's my interpretation. So what I mean by that is games have their one continuity universe, their own stories. Books have their own, but they're separate. But once they merge together similar ideals, that's where you get one story, one canon, right? Like for instance, in the books, do I believe that there's evidence that, for instance, Plush Trap, the little runt from the minigame in both FNAF 4 and FNAF VR Help 1 and 1, in the books, it's able to like chop through anything. It's able to chop through like metal garage doors and all that. Is there any evidence that Plush Trap that we see in those games is able to have capabilities of something like that? No. But the book talks about it. So is that the same, or is it just a separate story? There's also this idea that I'm trying to remember. There's like these, like, they're called Lonely Freddies, which is like a little plushie of a Freddy. I believe it's just normal Freddy, where it's the black bear with a black bow tie and accessories. But it's called Lonely Freddy because it outright seeks out kids who are alone, right? Where they're at a birthday party and kids being outcasts, being alone, not really being as social as the other kids. Lonely Freddy speaks to them and earns their trust and starts to speak to them and tries to be a friend. And eventually gets to a point where they are seen as so trusting to be a friend, where it becomes a point where the Lonely Freddy brainwashes them and steals the kids who was originally alone, steals their consciousness, and the Freddy is now possessing that kid after stealing their body. Have we seen anything like that in the games? Absolutely not. But that happened in the books. So my viewpoint has always been, again, game timeline, game story, book timeline, separate. But if you see something in the games, or if you see something in the books and the ideals are shared, then you may have somewhere as far as stories go. Because on the flip side, think about stuff that first came out in the books that we learned in the games. William Afton, we learned from the books, the original trilogy of books, before Dislocation, FNAF 6, and those other games to come out. We learned the killer was named William Afton from the books from the original trilogy. Henry was a book character. Edwin was a book character. FNAF Into the Pit started as a book and a graphic novel before we got the game by Mega Cat Studios, which is a great game, by the way. I have a full playthrough of the series on the channel in 2 editions. So you can go watch that after you watch this. I have the actual parts, actual episodes, where it's split up in chunks. But I also, within the last month or two, compiled together all those episodes into one long YouTube video. So if you want to binge all the episodes in one video instead of having to look for each part, you can go watch that after this video, obviously. And obviously, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share comments on what you think about these FNAF videos because it all helps out the algorithm and I always appreciate it. If you support me, I support you. All right, back to your normal scheduling programming.
Defeated in the books, and does that cross over to the games? Well, at the end of the Tales of the Pizzaplex epilogues, our main character, Lucia, tricks the Mimic into crawling into a Springlock suit. There's suits all over the pizzeria that they're hiding and trying to survive the Mimic from, including a few Springlock suits. And once it enters that Jester Springlock suit, she sneaks up behind it and hits it to activate the Springlocks inside, crumpling the Mimic within its suit. She waits outside until it stops moving, but once it's fully stopped, she walks back in and hits the comically large off switch on the back of its neck, because in the books, the Mimic has a comically large off switch on the back of its neck. Now, follow me here, but take that method, tricking it into a Springlock and activating the Springlocks. Hold that in your head, and remember, we still have one unexplained Springlock suit in the series.
One? We have one? I could name like 10. Because if one of my criticisms about Chica the Mimic, when the game came out, is it feels like everything's a Springlock suit. Originally, the Springlock mechanism was solely a Golden Freddy and Golden Bonnie thing. It was unique to them. But nowadays, Chica is seen as a Springlock suit. Baby's a Springlock suit. Monty is now a Springlock suit. Bub, the dog, also from that underground pizzeria, is also a Springlock suit. So, which is unexplained? Like, at this point, everything's a Springlock suit. And not to quote Syndrome from The Incredibles, but when everything's a Springlock suit, nothing is.
Not Fredbear's Spring Bonnie, but the Night 4 sister location Springlock suit that never has been revealed to us.
Okay.
One that honestly visually matches up with a theoretical Funtime Chica quite well. What am I trying to say here? William Afton gets word from Fazbear that Arnold managed...
I mean, all we know about that Springlock suit from Night 4's location is Baby outright says that it's a Springlock suit that came from our old pizzeria. And that's all we know. Which wouldn't really make much sense if it's a Chica suit, because, again, Circus Baby's Pizza World and Chica's Pizza Party or Party World or whatever it's called, we believe that to be separate franchises, separate businesses. So, Baby referencing another business, sure, it's owned by Fazbear Entertainment, but it's a separate business location. That really won't make any sense. She outright calls out her pizzeria. So, I don't know about that.
To obtain the Mimic schematics, but for whatever reason stopped communicating on the drive home. So he sends someone out to look for it, and they find Arnold and his crashed car, but no data diver to be found. At this point, William Afton realized what had happened. The Mimic likely tracked him down and took the schematics from him, the only copy remaining. He needs to find that mimic if he's ever hoping to make his own. But how? He can't just track down an endoskeleton in the middle of the Utahan woods. How is that going to be beneficial to anybody? Is it Utahan? Utonian? I don't care enough to look it up. And clearly it's not coming back to Murray's Costume Manor anytime soon. He would need some sort of bait to lure the mimic out of hiding. Something the mimic couldn't resist. What if the mimic thought Edwin Murray survived? After all, Edwin Murray is basically the main antagonist in the mimic's life.
Yeah, because Edwin was the one who, beat it into submission, which caused the mimic to have those homicidal tendencies to be a villain. And again, like I brought up earlier in this video, when Edwin is called for help and his legs are broken, M2 is used a lot of Edwin's mannerisms to taunt him and saying, oh, daddy's busy, we can go play later.
He built the mimic, told it to do something, and then beat it senselessly and refused to repair it after it did the one thing he told it to do. He hates Edwin so much he blew him up and left him to die. So if the mimic thought that Edwin survived, then the idea that it would seek out revenge makes perfect sense. But how could William Afton get the news out that Edwin Murray was alive and well? Well, he wouldn't want to use Murray's Costume Manor because the mimic ain't going anywhere near there anymore. And he wouldn't want to use Fredbear's or Freddy Fazbear's Pizza because that's his brand. He wouldn't want to tarnish it. But in obtaining Murray's Costume Manor, he's also obtained all the partnerships that company had gone through, including Chica's Party World, a company that he has no ties to and has no responsibility if things go south, but a company that was already hiring MCM to make suits for them. So how do we make it seem like Edwin Murray is taking a hands-on approach at Chica's Party World? By using one of his most impressive and hardest to replicate inventions, a springlock suit. William Afton would make his very first springlock suit, Springlock Chica. After all, she was the first. She has seen everything. But a springlock suit with the express goal of luring the mimic to put it on and activate it while it's inside, severely damaging the mimic, and in doing so, sedating it. And this is where I think the game would take place. How would this game work? My guess is frankly more of a traditional sit and survive styled FNAF game. Maybe something that is more open world, it's hard to tell anymore, but a game where we're watching over these animatronics and eventually the main star of the show, Chica, becomes infected with the mimic, or rather being warned by it, seems pretty possible. And then in one of the endings, we activate the springlock suit, sedating the mimic, and then William Afton gets his hands on it. A public display like that would probably close Chica's Party World for good, but then William Afton just gets to obtain yet another character for the Freddy Fazbear project, since he wanted Chica on the roster anyway, and now he has a mimic to play with. A mimic that's just been severely damaged and is in need of repairs. Repairs that would change the way the mimic looked permanently. And after you dragged it back to MCM to the underground testing facility where you can do experiments on it and pulled the mimic out of it, if you left the suit there, wouldn't you know it, but those underground labs are exactly where Sister Location likely began, meaning this Chica Springlock suit would be left right in Sister Location. Somewhere it would remain unused until many years later, when Circus Baby places Michael Afton inside and lets him know that it was only ever used once, but not for the way it was intended. So that...
Ha. Interesting. Very, very interesting. I will say, it is kind of crazy how much attention Chica has got over the years. To the point where you could make the argument that Chica is the most important character in the series. And honestly, I don't blame you if you have that interpretation. Like, she's outright more important than the puppet, which is crazy to think about. Which, there's nothing wrong. I never hated Chica or anything like that, even when I became first a fan of the series back when it came out in 2014. But still, like, I've always been fine with Chica, but, this much, them being this important all of a sudden, okay. But, again, like, my main, Actually, Devil's Advocate is the other baby line where she says it came from my old pizzeria, right? But again, if we believe Chica's Party World to be a separate business, yeah, owned by Fazbear Entertainment, but it's not connected to babies, then why would she say that? So that I'm not really too sure about. Um, but if that is what happens, I'm gonna think about that for a second as we wrap up here. And also let me know your thoughts of what you think about this while I ponder about it. So you can also let me know comments of what you think about the theory as a whole, but also my thoughts as we wrap up here of whether you agree or disagree with what I'm about to say. But if that's what happens, then I don't know. My question then is it still goes unexplained how Chica becomes a part of the Core 4 roster, right? You know what I mean? Like it's still unclear how it happened. Because again, we've always believed in the very beginning that Chica has always been separate from Freddy Bonnie. Freddy Bonnie has always been the OG's original since the very beginning. When Fazbear first started, Chica and Foxy have always been later additions, and that's why we believed Chica to be a mediocre melody at one point. And then that's how they eventually joined the FNAF Core 4, and that's how they would become a staple from the foreseeable future. But if that's the interpretation, that still doesn't really explain how Chica becomes part of the Core 4 roster. So that's another pushback I have with it. But also, I don't know about you, but I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of that playstyle either. Because Chica the Mimic, we had a section where we were dealing with the Mimic wearing a Chica costume in Chica the Mimic. And then just for us to turn around and play a game where, again, it's us playing a game with the Mimic wearing a Chica costume, I feel like, why? Like, we're waiting for over a year for a new FNAF game to come out, and that's what we do with it. We are simply rehashing old stuff again. Like, no, I kind of want to see new stuff, respectfully. But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts about what you think about it. And I guess one final point, as we're wrapping up here, do I see Steel Wool toning it down a bit and playing like typical old school classic FNAF where you're sitting in an office and doing resource management, power management, watching cameras, watching doors, and being very precise with your controls. I don't see Steel Wool doing anything like that. Security Breach, Ruin, Secret of the Mimic has taught us that they are all about the open world exploration. So I see them going down that route. But hey, if I'm wrong, I will gladly admit that I'm wrong. But I don't think Steel Wool will do that sort of thing. Because again, Steel Wool is very talented animators who worked at stuff like Pixar. And you have all those talented animators just for you to use like a point and click resource management camera checking game. Why are we waiting this long then? I don't know about that. But again, let me know your thoughts.